are on the right side of history. I wear many hats, fabulous hats, at this university. I have been a student here in the late 80s and early 90s. I have been an alumnus of this institution for 20 plus years. I am currently, and have been for many years, a faculty member at this institution. And so I have an interesting vantage point with respect to this institution. I see it from the inside and the outside, from long ago and right now. I have many lenses and many eyes on this place. It was when I was a student, when I came to Harvard in the fall of 1989, just months after Tiananmen Square, months before the fall of the Berlin Wall, when Nelson Mandela was still a prisoner and a communist and a terrorist in a prison cell in South Africa. That was when I first heard the word divestment. I had never heard the word divestment until I walked on this campus. When I saw shanty towns and multiracial student groups who were protesting this university's investments in South Africa, but not just in South Africa, in the white supremacist regime of apartheid in South Africa that was responsible for imprisoning Nelson Mandela and so many of his brothers and sisters who were, yes, we know now, on the right side of history then. And before I even registered for classes, I participated in protests in this very spot, which is now, at this point in my life, a hallowed ground. Having been here so many times, I feel like they should, dedicate a tree to me when I leave here. That was when I first heard of divestment. And I came here to study, but I also, it turns out, came here to protest. I came here to become a scholar, but I also came here to become a citizen. And when I was here protesting in this very yard, I'm sure there were administrators and people in power who were worried about the safety of the people who live in the buildings, the safety of the precious cherubs who constitute this university. But my parents, my working class, first generation parents, those social justice Catholic crusaders did not send me here to be safe or to think safely. They sent me here as the promise of their possibility, as their embodiment, their only hope for the realization of some kind of American dreams. To not be safe, but to be bold. To not value security, but to promote criticism. To be a kind of citizen that made the world a better place, so that we don't have to contemplate the choices we make to be on the right side of history, because history will have come to fruition. I also wear a hat as an alumnus of this place, and that's an interesting thing, to be an alumnus of Harvard, to get those appeals for money, to be asked to serve on task forces, to come back every 5 years for reunions. And one of the things that I have had the privilege to do during my time as an alumnus is serve as a lifetime appointed class officer, to serve on the executive committee of the Harvard Alumni Association, to be most recently the vice president of the Harvard Alumni Association. And when you're in those kinds of positions, you are at tables that you are not used to being at. And one of the most interesting things in my time as an alum is being in conversations about what to do with Harvard's money. Not conversations I ever thought I would be part of. And to be in conversations about how we position ourselves to the rest of the world, how this institution is viewed and understood and liked or not. And one of the most interesting conversations I've been part of is what to do with the divest people. And sometimes when I'm at those tables, I don't know if they know that I am one of those divest people. I've been a divest person since I stepped on this campus. The conversations we're having about where to put our money are often about strategy and transparency and how we exercise our agency as stakeholders. And what I am constantly trying to get folks to understand is that if we are at the table, if the argument is that we should not divest because we should be at the table, we should be stakeholders, we should put pressure on fossil fuel companies and other companies. Fossil fuel companies aren't the only folks ruining this planet. If we're at the table as stakeholders, then we need to exercise that agency. But my retort to that is, if you are at the table and the only thing you're doing is enjoying the bounty of the meal, then you are an illegitimate stakeholder. You do not deserve to be at that table. And while we're at it, I want to know which tables we're at. I want to know where our money goes, because all of us who are here and everybody out there deserves to know where the second richest nonprofit in the world's money is. It deserves to know what that money is doing and how that money is operating in the world. And if we don't know that, if we do not have transparency about that, then we will continue to come to this hallowed ground. We will continue to fight for divestment, and we will continue to hold this institution accountable for not only the good it does in the world, but the very, very bad things it does in the world. I tell my students all the time that being at Harvard means that you are at an institution that is great. But being at Harvard will never guarantee that you are good.
Preach that.
And we, as faculty here, must continue to teach that lesson. And we must continue to embody that model. My third hat here is as a faculty member. And one of the things, I was one of the early signatories on the petition for support of divestment. Yeah. I'm what they call one of the usual suspects. When there's a petition around here, my name is often on it. I love Facebook. It's like my petition profile has expanded exponentially. Like, support. But I support this deeply because I have learned something from my students. I grew up in the 80s and 90s where the cause of environmentalism was certainly robust and powerful, but it was not one that I necessarily embraced or knew much about. I was late to this game. And the reason I have come to this game, this movement, this struggle, is because of my students. Every year I ask my Kennedy School students to write down on a questionnaire what the 3 most important dilemmas in the world, the 3 most powerful things that are wrong with the world, and they always say the same things. Some kind of extremism and intolerance, poverty, and climate change. All of them, every single student of mine at the School of Public Policy and Government here identifies this as one of the great challenges of our age. This generation gets it. My student Kenyon Woodward just wrote a brilliant thesis on the climate justice movement, and he too taught me a lesson. That this is no longer a moment to have polite conversations and debates about climate change. This is a time for all of us to awaken and join the growing movement for climate justice. When I first arrived back at Harvard in the fall of 1998 to teach, I went to a ceremony in Tercentenary Theater, just a hop, skip, and a jump from where we are now. It was an honorary degree ceremony for Nelson Mandela, who a decade before had been a prisoner and a communist and a terrorist. We were honoring him outside of our normal routine because he should have been honored. One of the great heroes of our age, God rest his soul. And at that ceremony, I sat in the 11th row because I was a director of the Harvard Alumni Association. And I sat in that 11th row, and I watched as the president of my university apologized to President Mandela for being on the wrong side of history. I was thrilled to be at a moment, in a place where that man was being honored by a university that I had some relationship to. But I was so fucking embarrassed that the university, that same university, had refused to fully divest from white supremacy in South Africa. But I was proud as hell to have been on the right side of history, little part of a big global movement that helped to free Nelson Mandela from prison, that helped to amplify the global voices for freedom and liberation in South Africa and across the globe. This divestment movement and that divestment movement are connected in history. We are connected to that history. And if we don't rise up at this moment, and everyone we know rise up at this moment and divest and meet the coming climate catastrophe with all of the energy that we have, we will not be on the right side of history. We will go down in history as not having been bold. So let us be bold. Let us be bold.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Emery Ogletree. I'm an extension student at Harvard University.
Yeah.
And I wanted to touch base on what he mentioned with apartheid and Harvard's involvement with that. I recently experienced some racial discrimination at the Harvard night class. When my teacher found out in my Expo 25 that I was part black, I started pulling in low C's in my class instead of B's. And never had an A, but B's, and I went to C's. And also the discrimination against the extension school. We're not even allowed to have campus rights. We have to stay